Welcome to the Mindspace podcast. I'm Joe Flanders. Thanks for tuning in. The Mindspace podcast is my personal, in-depth exploration of the science and practice of well-being. I'm sharing this journey with you because I believe we can all lead happier and more meaningful lives by getting the facts and training our minds. Join me as I learn and share the most inspiring insights about human flourishing from leading experts, because we could all use a little more mind space. My guest today is Adrian Schauer. Adrian is an entrepreneur, angel investor, and philanthropist, and a personal friend. He's currently the CEO of Alayacare, a provider of home healthcare software with 130 employees, and that enables hundreds of thousands of home healthcare visits every month around the world. Alayacare is Adrian's third startup, and he's had successful exits from the previous two. So he has achieved quite a bit, and he's just approaching his 40th birthday. Our conversation centered on the theme of how to create and sustain meaning at work, both for individuals and leaders in organizations. I think you'll agree that Adrian is incredibly thoughtful on this topic. He has a ton of experience and lots of insights, as well as a remarkable capacity to synthesize complex ideas into digestible sound bites. As someone who thinks a lot about my own meaning at work and that of my colleagues and clients, I experience our conversation as a kind of masterclass on engagement and purpose. I hope it's similarly inspiring to you. Our conversation covered Adrian's purpose as an entrepreneur, how he approaches keeping his employees and stakeholders engaged, how mindfulness has impacted the culture at Alayacare, the importance of alignment between actions and values, both personally and professionally, and what practices he relies on to stay healthy, balanced, motivated, and energized. One final note before getting to the interview. In case you're not aware, Mindspace has an increasingly robust offering to organizations interested in improving engagement, culture, and well-being. Our team brings expertise in mindfulness and 30 plus years of experience in management consulting to the table. So if this is something your organization is considering, please visit mindspacewellbeing.com or reach out at info@mindspacewellbeing.com. And now, here's my interview with Adrian Schauer. Hey, Adrian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm the CEO of Alayacare. It's my third startup in the tech space. I come from a heritage of engineer entrepreneur, and that's the path I've always really imagined for myself. I did my first startup with a buddy when I was mid-20s, and then that had a successful exit, spun off a company from there, another successful exit, and then 4.5 years ago, founded Alayacare.
So what is Alayacare? What do you guys do?
So we're a software company for the home healthcare industry. We basically provide the software that home healthcare providers need to run their business. We're enabling hundreds of thousands of home care visits around the world every month, and what I'm particularly proud of is over these last really 4.5 years, we've grown the team from a handful to 130 people, and we've managed to really work with some of the best organizations around the world to help them deliver great care.
I will point out, because people can't see you, given this is audio, that you're on your third startup and you're not 40 yet. So,
but I'm getting pretty close.
Yeah. So you've been pretty productive in a short span of career so far. So maybe just tell us a little bit more about what Alayacare does exactly.
Sure. So our customer is the home healthcare provider, and they essentially run their business on our software. So we manage all the operations, scheduling of the visits, the clocking in and out of visits, and then we manage the whole clinical piece. So the care plans developed, all at the point of care, the clinicians are charting in our software, and then at the end of that, we manage all the billing and payroll. And what's really unique about our software is that we've combined all the enabling tools for the traditional in-person home care with telehealth and remote patient monitoring tools, really getting towards this future state of home care, which is much more technology enabled.
Wow, so that in itself could be really helpful for patients and healthcare providers, yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's better for everyone. As anyone who's been sick or has an aging parent knows, everyone would prefer to be in their home rather than a hospital. The health system prefers people to stay in their home. It's cheaper, and providers also prefer it. So to the extent great care can be delivered at home, it's a win-win-win from all aspects.
So why home healthcare, Adrian? Is this a passion you've been carrying for a long time from your childhood? Where does the motivation come to get into this particular line of business?
Alayacare wasn't founded on around a personal experience of a loved one receiving care that was subpar and wanting to change the industry. It was a bit more deliberate. I had in mind the type of business I wanted to be in. I also had some success previously. This endeavor is less about the money and more about trying to do something meaningful in the world. So my thought on Alayacare is that for us to be successful, all we need is for old people to receive great care at home and for people who join our team to have meaningful careers. And so I really wanted a business where we could do good by doing well.
Well, so how's it going so far?
So far, so good. We picked, I think, the right moment in history, read the tea leaves correctly. Home care is growing like crazy around the world. It's changing, and there's major disruption, both from a technology point of view and the pressures on the industry. So pretty much everywhere we do business, there's lots of demand, but the challenge for our customers is they can't attract and retain enough care workers. So this technology-enabled solution we're providing for home care is really topical.
I'm not sure how much of the details of your books you want to share with us, but I've spoken to you in the past about how the business is doing, and it always blows my mind when I hear your situation. So you have a burn rate, I think in the six-figure range.
Correct.
And I think the company is worth tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Is that a fair estimate?
Yep.
Feel free to share details if you want or not. So how does that make sense that you're basically losing tons of money every month and yet the valuation is astonishingly high?
That's a good question. And I won't pretend we're not in a bubble. This software as a service market that we're a subset of is definitely highly valued. But there's good reasons for it. So the fundamental business model is great. We sell subscriptions to our software, and the gross margins on those subscriptions are extremely high. So if we were to let go 125 of our 130 people tomorrow, we could still sustain the millions of dollars of recurring revenue we have year over year. The software would stop evolving, but our customers would keep using it for a long time, and we could theoretically generate lots of profit on that. So the fundamental business model is good. Also, we're doubling or tripling our business every year. So the fact that there's a fundamentally sound product we're selling, that it's sticky. In other words, our customers are likely to stay with the product for a long time, and we're able to attract lots of customers. The investment community has said, you know what, this is an asset we want to own. And then after that, it's an essential supply and demand of how much money is chasing how few good assets like this.
So this all sounds very quantitative and calculated. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if it's not clear to listeners already, I can attest to the fact that you're very competent at that level in terms of understanding the marketplace and the financial models that you need to leverage to be successful. But then there's also the human side of what you're doing, which you alluded to earlier. It's the patients that get better care. It's your employees having a meaningful career. Maybe just talk more about your personal investment in being successful.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that at the end of the day, my asset walks in and out of the door every day. The people at Alayacare are Alayacare. Yes, there's some software, But essentially, I view this company as most tech startups as a rallying point between employees, customers, investors, an idea that all those stakeholders can pour their trust and their energy into. So if that's how I see Alayacare, then I see my role in Alayacare as being the person who has to set and maintain that vision and keep the balance between all the stakeholders so that everyone can realize success with this project.
Okay, Adrian, tell us your vision.
So, our vision is that the future of home care is going to be a well-orchestrated combination of in-home visits, virtual visits, and remote monitoring. And the data we collect on patients through these various touch points is going to be a rich source of insight for delivering better care. That's the soundbite.
It's pretty good. Now, you have to make this vision really come alive for people, for the stakeholders that you mentioned. And I'd like you to, if you can, talk about how you keep the stakeholders aligned with that vision. So, and let's start with the one that's top of mind for a lot of business owners. So a lot of ink has been spilled over the challenge of keeping millennials engaged.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in an insulting way to millennials. It's just a way to identify a demographic which is taking up more and more space in the labor force. So how do you approach the problem of keeping people motivated to work hard towards this vision?
Yeah, that's the classic question, the why, right? And until we were 40, 50 people, I didn't need to be that explicit about it. And that's because at that scale, at that size, everybody was in fairly direct contact with the why. Even a developer writing code would get out to a client, would meet the nurse delivering care in the home, would be at most one jump away from the end result of their work. As we get bigger, that becomes harder. And so for the last couple of years, I've been very explicit about it. Our purpose as an organization is to enable the type of care we would want our loved ones to receive at home. I have a slide on that. I have a picture of my father-in-law, which helps me maintain that personal connection to the why. And I put that up at every town hall, followed by the vision, the mission, and our values. But I put up the why explicitly and ask everyone to think about what their personal connection is to the why.
Any other tactics?
I'm a bit resistant to the term tactic. I said it's more explicit now than it used to be, but I don't consider it a tactic. I think I know at the front end of my career when I was working a job for somebody else, what made it meaningful was understanding the big picture and seeing how my efforts contributed to the whole. So I consider this not a tactic, but a core part of what I do. It's also a precondition for success in a startup, I think. So, one point I want to make about millennials is that they get a lot of credit for forcing employers to bring meaning and purpose into their job, but they didn't invent that concept. Great companies always had purpose. Great leaders always connected people to meaning. The millennials, for reasons we could discuss, just have that as an expectation. They didn't invent the concept.
So I'm guessing the word tactic invokes like manipulation or something, or some kind of opaque intention.
Mm-hmm.
And you're resisting that because in your case, it is authentic and aligned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet there are tons of engagement enhancing tactics out there.
Yep.
So why not the word tactic? It is something that you're doing. Okay, in this case, it's not manipulative,
mm-hmm.
but let's say you're an HR person or a learning and development person in a large organization. They have to figure out strategies and they have to figure
mm-hmm.
out tactics to keep people engaged.
I think you nailed it. It's the sense that it's not authentic. If that association isn't there, I've no problem with the word. But I think there is nothing worse than an explicit attempt to create engagement that is inauthentic. If it's inauthentic, I think you're better off not doing it or going back and searching it into what you can authentically put forward as a purpose. And if I can use that statement as a lead-in to how I would have had to answer this question earlier in my career, I've been thinking a lot about it. So being in the health tech industry, this is very easy because the result of our work, if we do it right, is better care. It's pretty easy. First business I was involved with was a mobile marketing company. And when we did well, Pepsi sold more sodas, right? Or Nike sold more shoes. And what was meaningful work in that context? It was much harder. I mean, we were younger, this wasn't topical, but we had the same challenge, is why are people going to pour an exorbitant amount of their mental and emotional energy into this project we had together? And at the time, it was very much about the community we had within the startup. There was the classic, growth, success, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, the meaning for people came from the fact that they were in a project together with people they cared about, who cared about them, and we were all trying to realize something together.
Okay, so what about organizations consumer organizations, you mentioned Pepsi and Nike, are they just going to lose out in the competition for talent because they can't create that deep alignment? Or do they rely on that sense of community? How would you advise the leaders in those kinds of organizations?
That's a good question. I think they have a harder challenge, but I think you've seen even some multinationals like Nestle that, historically have had, some smirches on them, some questionable practices in low and middle income countries. And now Nestle wraps itself in purpose, and they still sell lots of sugary treats to people. But the things that the flag they plant is authentic. I don't think it covers their whole business model, but I do think they're authentically trying to do some things that are good. And I don't have a lot of friends who work at Nestle. I don't know how much employees feel this, but I think you can find something within your business model or how you engage with your community or even how you engage with your employees, with each other, that people can feel an alignment with.
It does raise the more philosophical question around different business models having the potential to do more good in the world and therefore engage its people more deeply. How do you think about this range of business models and their implications for the world?
That's a great question. I mean, if the net result of this generation demanding meaning and purpose in their work is that the board is tilted towards companies or initiatives that do make the world a better place in the way that's defined by the citizenry, hey, I think that's great. I have no problem with that. There are certain things that do need to be done in our society which are less glamorous than helping sick people get better. So I don't think it can be a full answer, but if there's a tilt to the board towards companies that do well, great.
Millennials are stereotypically really concerned about impact. And it sounds like collectively they could have huge impact by tilting the board, to use your expression, and demanding more engagement with like pro-social or climate change initiatives or things like that. Are you familiar with any especially innovative practices in organizations, like any HR departments that doing really cool stuff and really forward-thinking stuff on engagement and purpose?
Yeah. I had dinner with the founders of Element AI last week.
Do you want to just tell people what Element AI is?
Yeah, Element, it's Montreal-based startup. I put startup in quotations because they're 500 people three and a half years into their project. But they are growing unbelievably quickly, and their primary asset is that they're a talent agglomerator. So AI is, in the early days of changing the world. And we can argue about whether that will ultimately be for better or worse, but it's a very impactful shift. There's not enough talent out there, and Element AI has realized that if they can put that talent together, give some direction to it, and then productize some of the offerings, they've really got something here. And so for them, it's their core competency has to be attracting and retaining talent that has lots of options. So they're looking, I hope I'm not spilling the beans here, but they are looking at implementing a combination of employee benefit and this 20% time concept that you heard innovated at Google over, I guess, in the last decade, where people can put 20% of their time towards a personal project. And they're looking at ways to combine that 20% time with commitment to causes that are meaningful to employees. So I think to the extent they can pull this off, that is extremely interesting.
What do you mean a cause that's important to employees?
Could be, somebody working there who has a young kid in a community, and that community wants to accomplish, some little micro social cause, and maybe AI can help align resources towards solving that problem. Or for someone else, it could be having an impact on climate change. No bigger problem out there, but it's basically using the tools that the organization is developing to help people impact the things that matter to them in life.
So we can call it a tactic if we acknowledge that it is actually from the heart. There's no manipulation at all. It's totally transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know if it's working, and how do you know if it's working?
We try and measure engagement. We do employee net promoter score.
What's employee net promoter score?
Essentially boils down to a question: how likely are you to recommend a friend or colleague to work at Alayacare? And you answer from 0 to 10. 0 to 6 is considered a detractor, 7 or 8 is neutral, 9 or 10 is a promoter, and then you calculate a score based on those responses. And we score very highly on that metric relative to our peers. So we measure it, we're proud of it, we foster it. But I don't think any single metric can tell the whole story. So, we have our people recommend a tremendous amount of their friends to come work at Alayacare. That's the actual living of that question. So that's a good indicator. But ultimately, a lot of it's feel, right? We hired 40 people in the last 4 months. I walk around the office. Someone who's new to Alayacare, I have a chat with over a coffee. How do they feel about their job? What does it mean to them? And I think we're doing a good job. It feels like it's working. But I worry that, we are bigger now. If you just start in quality assurance at Alayacare, you are now 6 hops from the impact of the work you do. You're a QA on a team of developers, and that team of developers reports to an engineering manager who reports up to a VP of engineering, who build what product management specs for you, who have people that work with our client success team who are out there talking to the people that are using the software. So how tight can that connection really be, whether I put up a slide at the beginning of every town hall or not? So I'm preoccupied by this. And I think more tactics are needed to go beyond the slide and even to go beyond the authenticity of the message behind the slide. So we've done initiatives over the years trying to get the developers out to clients and meet the caregivers. For our Christmas party this year, before we got into the party of it, we picked our 30 favorite clients, and we broke into teams. Many of the teams had people new to Alayacare, and we tried to either build a little feature or deliver a dashboard, something that was going to be meaningful to our clients. And on every team was someone who'd spent a lot of time with that client. So I think initiatives like this are required.
So that's really about connecting people, your people, to the end result of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I know you take other initiatives that are more about creating community or creating even wellness in the organization. I know, for example, that you've been dabbling into the mindfulness space a little bit. Can you tell us how you see mindfulness fitting into this overall strategy? And again, I hesitate to use the word strategy because it implies manipulation, but again, in this case, assuming it's authentic.
Yeah. No, I think that's another thing you have to be explicit about, whether you call it strategy or tactics or not. The nature of our work is as if it was written for the need for mindfulness. Particularly on the product side of the business, it's deep concentrated work done in an environment of continuous distraction. And the difference in productivity between being able to stay engaged with a problem you're trying to solve for half an hour at a time, an hour at a time, rather than in the 12 seconds between the instant messages coming in on Slack, it's probably a 10x multiple on productivity, one state of being versus the other. So we are very aware of what increased mindfulness can do for our people. I don't think we've yet fully figured out how to bring that into the workplace, but we recognize its importance. And one of the really interesting things that happened actually in our after our last engagement with Mindspace was how the vocabulary of mindfulness entered into how people talk about what they were doing. I'm being mindful became a substitute for I'm not multitasking during this meeting. And I think often even just establishing the right way to think about attention has a huge impact in and of itself.
I feel we're back into this kind of tactic question because there's been so much criticism from let's say, the meditation community that's more preoccupied with ethics. I'm sure people are shuddering hearing you say that. It's like, oh my God, you want to deploy this practice that's, let's say, developed and refined by Buddhism among other traditions to, help people become more compassionate and more insightful about suffering in the world and make the world a better place and achieve a deep state of well-being. And you're talking about improving productivity by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
And yet this has the potential to be helpful not only for your organization, but for the individuals, right? Because they're going to feel better and feel healthier if they're practicing mindfulness or aware of the impact of how they use their attention. One of the concerns is that you care about mindfulness to the extent that it helps productivity, not to the extent that it helps people reduce suffering. And it might even help pacify them to just sort of accept and deal with inequities or conditions in the workplace that are fundamentally unhealthy.
I think it's an alignment question and an easy one because the goals of the company are not misaligned with the goals of the individual at the company. I'm going to focus a lot on the software developer role. We have lots of other roles, but generally people who have chosen this as a profession like solving problems. They like losing themselves in the problem they're trying to solve. When you try and promote a great developer into a management position, it is not always a reward. We face that constantly. And so if we're going to create an environment for people to spend their days the way they want to spend their days, often this mindfulness tactic is more about removing the obstacles to them being able to direct their attention and spend their time in a way that makes them most fulfilled. So I don't really see an opposition here, even though it is a tactic, and the goals of the company, although they aren't totally selfish, could be largely selfish.
What do you mean they could be largely selfish?
So if all we cared about was maximizing productivity per dollar spent in salary, we could still deploy mindfulness as a tactic. The fact that we also care about the well-being of our people is important, but it's incidental to the fact that we think mindfulness is worthwhile focusing on within our company.
Okay, Adrian, let's talk about a little bit more about you personally. We've talked a lot about, Alayacare and what it would mean for the organization to be successful. What about you personally? What does success look like for you?
It's interesting. I've been thinking about that quite a bit lately. I used to get a much better dopamine rush from the material milestones. In the first startup, first million of revenue, closing $100,000 deal, those things really worked, really got me going. And I was still at a phase in my life where, to the extent that represented personal wealth, I thought I could somehow translate that into some incremental happiness. That's not so true anymore. So the things that give me the most pride, the things I'm most connected to emotionally, are very tilted towards the people at Alayacare having great experiences. We had our holiday party a couple weeks ago. Always comes out with a few drinks, but these "I love you, man" moments are really how I measure my impact and would give me the most pride in what I do. And there were a lot of them, and they were all mutual. That's the other thing, is people who express their appreciation for Alayacare, creating an environment where they can grow and be successful. In every single case, I was able to say, "Why are you thanking me? We should be thanking you." And that was a great feeling.
Point taken that the material rewards are moving the needle less for you these days. But I think the financial rewards move the needle for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of entrepreneurs and, leaders and organizations. What do you make of the fact that the way our societies are rewarding successful entrepreneurs is arguably sort of out of balance, that there's an enormous concentration of wealth in a small number of people's hands, and you happen to be, at the moment, a beneficiary of that?
I think the important part of the making money or creating wealth, 90% of it is based on that being a measure of success. I mean, does LeBron James really, really like balls going through hoops? No, right? He likes competing at a game where there's a score and effort and creativity is rewarded with scoring more baskets, the sum of which leads to winning a game. So I think that is still 90% of the importance of money as a measure for tech startups. Now, it so happens that balls going through a basket, creating a score in a basketball game, don't have long-lasting societal impacts, whereas money does, right? Because money is also a store of value and a medium of exchange, and you can use it to do a lot of real things that matter to real people. The dynamics I talked about earlier in terms of the fundamental business model of tech, how leverageable it is what we do, that means that unlike almost any other moment in history, wealth can be accumulated extremely rapidly. Right? Zuckerberg can write a software program in his dorm room, 1.5 billion people use it, and 10 years later, he's got his personal wealth, if it were a country, is probably in the top 50. Right? How does that make sense, and what does that mean for society? I think what society has to figure out is how and when to redistribute that wealth, as opposed to trying to stop the mechanism of a person's energy leading to huge impact. I don't think it's fundamentally wrong that few people today can have a bigger impact than 100 years ago. But I think society has to continue to figure out how you tax people in their lifetimes, how you tax them after their lifetimes. And I think if we get that right, get that more right, the societal imbalances will come better into focus.
What I'm hearing is you're attributing the rise of inequality in capitalist, let's say Western societies, largely to the rise of technology and how technology helps people create wealth more quickly.
That's a complex question you're asking. And I don't have all the answers to it, of course. I think if you take too simplistic a view of it as a society, you're not likely to solve the problem properly. So I think you have to acknowledge that some of it, why does LeBron James make $50 million a year? It's not that society decided that was worth it, relative to a teacher's salary. But what people decided was hundreds of millions of people decided that on a Friday night, they want to turn on the TV and they want to watch the best basketball in the world. I mean, they could go to the local high school and watch the game there. And to the extent people did that versus watching the NBA, LeBron would make less money. And that's technology that's enabled everyone in the world to watch LeBron play. So he's gotten leverage. He's not a tech entrepreneur, but he's gotten leverage in the wealth he can accumulate because there are hundreds of millions of people who want to watch what he does and can today. And that wasn't true 100 years ago.
You mentioned earlier that you thought that 90% of what motivates people to make money is simply the fact that money is the scorekeeper, or it's the score in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You really think that's true, 90%? You don't think there are people that are more greedy and just into money for its own sake?
I've spoken to lots of tech entrepreneurs who've made a lot of money, a lot more than me. Some of them still try and justify their desire for wealth accumulation on the basis of how that wealth can be spent. I've had, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in Canada, who's into the hundreds of millions of wealth, say, no, Adrian, you can't think about it in terms of what I can spend the money on or what my kids can spend the money on. You have to be thinking in generations. It's about your children's children's children. And I found that ridiculous. I really found that ridiculous. So maybe 90% for everyone isn't the right answer, but I think it is for a lot of people. And then there's also the tie to power, and power not necessarily in a bad way. If I look at the assuming Alayacare is as successful as I think it's going to be, the 10% that's left. Again, it's not about consumption, but I think it'll that level of wealth will provide a certain amount of power, and that power can be deployed towards things I care about, which broadly I think are good, and that's why I care about them.
So I'm aware of deep and impressive alignment in your case, in your sort of personal psychology. For you to have impact in the world, make the world a better place, you can make a big difference for people who need healthcare at home.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that successfully, you need to keep your employees and the stakeholders in Alayacare engaged and happy and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And what gives you the deepest gratification at your holiday party is feedback that the people in your community feel proud of what they're doing and feel grateful and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel to have that alignment?
It's more a question of what it would feel like to not have that alignment.
Okay, what does that mean?
I don't really see it as a choice. A lack of alignment would be very uncomfortable, right? There'd be that dissonance between how you think of yourself, how you communicate priorities to one group and act in another context. To the extent I have a choice, I don't want to have inconsistent views and inconsistent priorities. It's a type of suffering.
But in a way, you're carrying a responsibility to keep this thing alive. Like, you can't show up at work and just sort of mail it in. You have to be walking and talking and living and embodying this purpose all the time. How do you keep it alive? How do you stay inspired?
Good question. I don't know the answer to it. This is the best job and the worst job in the world, often in the same day. If I look at the mix of uplifting experiences I have in my day-to-day, ones that fill the pot rather than drain the pot, it's probably 10-1 draining the pot versus filling the pot. So when said that way, why the hell would I choose to spend my time this way? I don't really have a good answer to that, except I know that being listless would make me unhappy. I know that the struggle, I find meaning in the struggle. Yeah, that's the best I got.
So practically speaking, Adrian, what do you do on a day-to-day, week-to-week, or month-to-month basis to keep yourself going? Everything from the concrete to the more spiritual kind of engagement.
So I think the balance on a week-to-week basis is important. On a day-to-day basis, I don't always achieve it. But on a week-to-week basis, I make sure I get in competitive sports. I make sure I get in present time with my family, with my friends. And I know if I don't succeed for any extended period of time to have some balance, I don't do my day job very well. On a more spiritual plane, I get a lot of reinforcement from spending time with other entrepreneurs. I get a lot of reinforcement from my family, and that's not to say that I talk business with my family, but it's an important part of my life, and it recharges the batteries for sure. And then the other thing I do is the exact same thing I'm advising for my employees is I get out into the field and I try and see the impact of what I do. And those are very rejuvenating experiences.
So Adrian, I'm aware that you have a meeting coming up in a few minutes, so we need to wrap this up. I wonder if there's anything else that you want to say that you feel we haven't covered.
I think one of the ways you get alignment in your life is to try and telescope between the long range, the short range, the medium range, and all the various contexts you're in, and just try and see if you can tell yourself the same story through all of those. And as soon as you can't, go to work figuring out how you can, either by changing the story or by changing what your goals are in any of those contexts. I said it at the outset, the only things that have to happen for Alayacare to be successful is that old people have to receive great care at home, and people have to find Alayacare as a place to build a meaningful career. That's the longest term, and it's also a perspective in decisions I make every day of my life is useful, or every day of my professional life. So I think consistency, spending the mental energy to get consistency will bring you alignment. That's something I recommend to everyone.
What do you mean tell yourself the same story in different contexts?
I mean, it's a way of saying worldview. It's a way of making sense of what you're doing and where you're directing your energies. And, an example of an inconsistency would be, hey, today I'm going to deploy the tactic of making people feel connected to their work so that 5 years from now I can fly a private jet after having sold the business. that would be an example of dissonance. That would be a lack of alignment, and I wouldn't want to exist in that state.
Because?
Because then you're inauthentic. You have to maintain different ways of thinking. You have to figure out where those rub up against themselves. You have to make hard decisions all the time. Whereas if you have a consistent view, even hard decisions are not about the battle of your values. They're about, how to realize them in the world. And my mind stays happily in that state, whereas it stays very unhappily in a state where I'm trying to pick priorities and make one perspective overlap with another perspective that are fundamentally not overlapping.
So how, mechanically, how do you develop that consistency? Like, someone's hearing you, gets inspired, maybe doesn't think at that level, or it's not part of how they operate on a day-to-day basis. How do you do that exactly?
Well, I think everyone all the time, myself included, has the experience of two incoherent perspectives rubbing up against themselves. Example, I need to get to the office now. I've got a call to sort through an acquisition that we want to make, where there are people who are going to come into the Alayacare family, and the right business idea is to figure out how quickly we can not need those people. Okay? So I can go into that trying to maximize the profitability in this negotiation, and I could focus on that, and then I'm going to be taking a sip of water and have to tell myself why those people are less deserving of my care than people we hired rather than acquired. And everyone has those experiences. And it's very tempting to just dismiss those thoughts. But I find it very rewarding to not move past those thoughts, but force myself to make sense of it. Why are those people who I didn't choose, but who we've acquired to the team, are those people fundamentally different in terms of how I need to care, how I should care about them because of how they came into the family? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, that's okay. But I need to keep that perspective. I need to understand what it is and why it's different and act on that consistently. And if it's not, if the answer is no, then I need to spend the energy to figure out how these people who are joining Alayacare under a different circumstance are going to be part of the family.
So this sounds like being very aware of what thoughts and emotions are motivating your decisions, and always checking in with, I guess there's that word, alignment. Mm-hmm. How does this decision fit in the bigger picture, in the bigger model of what I'm doing? And if it doesn't, how do I correct that misalignment? Mm-hmm. So self-awareness is key.
And it's harder work than just moving past it.
It sounds like that requires a high level of discipline.
Yeah, I guess so.
What about people who just either don't care or don't have the discipline or are too tired? This is a pretty high standard you're appealing to.
There is an alternative. Don't do it. It's an investment. Spend energy now to save energy later. And not everybody makes good investments, but I think the most successful people understand what a good investment is. And in terms of how to live one's life, investing in alignment, I think, is one of the best investments one can make.
I think that's an absolutely beautiful place to leave it. Really appreciate you taking the time, Adrian. You've made me think quite a bit, and I'll probably spend the rest of the day trying to piece together the implications of everything you're saying. So thanks a lot, and I wish you lots of success with Alayacare.
Thank you, Joe. Enjoyed the discussion.
Thanks for listening to the Mindspace podcast. The purpose of this project is to inspire people to cultivate well-being. The science tells us that well-being is best understood as a series of skills and habits that can be learned and practiced. And I hope listening to these episodes helps you move forward on your own path to well-being. If you enjoy listening to the Mindspace podcast, please share your favorite episodes with friends, family, and colleagues. Thanks a lot.